Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Mayhem. I'm Deputy Chief Executive of Manufacture Northern Ireland, and I am delighted to welcome you all to our second webinar, which is in the series of 4 webinars in partnership with CPL's Future of Work Institute. Our overall theme is becoming an employer of choice. And as I say, there is a series of 4. This is the second in a series of 4, and we'll give you details on the other webinars at the end of this presentation. I'm delighted this afternoon to be joined by Elysia Hegarty. And Elysia is the Associate Director at the Future of Work Institute, which is part of the CPL group. She's over 20 years experience in human resource management, well-being and employee engagement. Elysia partners with businesses to help develop strategies to attract, engage and retain employees. She does this through diagnostic assessments, strategy design, workshops and events. In conjunction to her role, she is also president of Future Work Ireland's chapter, which is a network for senior leaders exploring the future of work. She frequently contributes to papers, articles and podcasts on a range of future of work topics. And she's passionate about how the future of work can thrive with human at its core. And we're really delighted on that really impressive resume, Elysia. To hand it over to you. We're in good hands here and really excited for your presentation. Just to say, everyone, that this is being recorded. We will send this out to our network following this webinar. We will have a Q&A session towards the end of Elysia's presentation. You can use the Q&A or the chat function to ask any questions in the meantime, and we'll try and cover off as many of those as possible. So over to you, Elysia. Thank you.
Super. Thank you so much. Really great to be here and great for the collaboration. So I'll just share my slides here now. Hopefully everyone can see that okay.
Yes.
Assuming that's a yes, perfect. Thank you. Thanks so much. It's challenging sometimes when you can't always see people. But thank you so much for having me. As Mary said, my name is Elysia Hegarty. I'm the Associate Director at the Future of Work Institute. And today, look, as part of the Employer of Choice series, if those of you who may have missed the first session with my colleague Barry a couple of weeks ago, I know that is available, and there's more sessions coming in the next couple of weeks, which I'll talk to you about as well at the end. So really today we're talking about, how you can craft a value proposition to retain top talent. So we know it's a very challenging market at the moment. When we talk about, crafting a value proposition, what do we really mean about that? So a people value proposition is what we call it, or PVP. Some people will call it EVP, employer value proposition, employee value proposition, whichever you decide to capture it as. It really is the total design of the value that people receive when they join your business. So that is the essence, the features, the experiences, the culture, the brand, and the story of your organization all rolled into one. Now, I know Barry touched on this a little bit in his session as well, but just to kind of refresh memories and maybe for anyone who wasn't there as well, this is our PVP model. We essentially understand that the people value proposition is not only the money that you get or the remuneration or the benefits that you get when you work for an organization. It can be one or more of these 20 or all of these 20 elements. So it could be anything from your mission and purpose, your company reputation, your brand, your values, your leadership behaviors, your work environment, your organization design, having meaningful and stimulating work for employees, learning and development, work-life balance, the innovation and technology that you may use, opportunities for career advancement, well-being, CSR and sustainability, recognition and rewards. All of these play a pivotal role in the value that you and your organization offer to current and potential employees. So when we talk about the value proposition, this is what we're talking about. So it's important to understand that there are 2 elements of a people value proposition. There's your external proposition, which is essentially how you are perceived by potential clients, candidates, and stakeholders, what they say, think, and believe about you as an organization and as an employer. And then there's also your internal proposition. So how you're perceived by your existing employees, existing clients, and stakeholders, what they say, think, and believe about you as an organization and an employer. In an ideal world, they should all be the same. But I know there are some organizations that, the external proposition can be very, very different to what's actually going on internally. But ideally, we want to make sure that our internal and our external propositions are really the narrative that is the reality, I guess, for employees. For the context of today's session, I'm going to focus mostly on the internal proposition because we're talking about, your value proposition and how that pertains to retention. We will, in other sessions, talk around the external proposition, but for today, we're talking primarily around retention. So what we know is that candidate and colleague and employee expectations are really, really changing when it comes to the value proposition and what we're looking for from a potential employer, and also what we're looking for from an existing employer. And that's changed over the last number of years. We can say COVID has probably had a direct impact on that and what people expect, but it has evolved substantially. At the moment, 50% of people are currently considering leaving their employer. And this is a staggering statistic, I think. And I think there are a number of driving factors that are really driving this percentage. And so some of our recent research has shown that some of the driving factors for this are, well, 43% is cost of living. That was the highest. 21% is lack of professional development. 14% is parenting and caring duties, 10% due to work-life balance or imbalance, and then 8% a lack of fulfillment in the role. So again, it's important to kind of consider some of the driving factors to these as well, and why people may be thinking about leaving your organization. Some of the motivating factors to stay. So when we were doing this piece of research, we also asked participants, what would motivate you to stay? Now, it's no surprise increased earnings was the number one. Also, very closely was improved leadership. 14% were looking for better work-life balance and flexibility. If they got that, they might stay. 10% career opportunities and 8% more meaningful projects. So again, very important to consider that there are a number of different elements that impact people's reasons to leave and impact people's reasons to stay. And this can be very, very individual as well. So I think an important thing to consider is, what if we can't offer more money? What if we as organizations are, working within very, very tight budgets? What if we have salary freezes? And what if we can't really compete with other organizations and offer more money in order to retain our key talent? Sometimes that is the option. Sometimes it may not be the option, and it really depends on the organization. And so I want to explore in today's session some of what I call are the atypical retention tools. So outside of money and the financial increases that we may be able to offer people to encourage them to stay, there are a number of retention tools that are really, really beneficial for organizations. Ideally, we want to be able to get to the stage where people haven't handed in their notice or thinking of leaving, or by the time we get to these retention tools, they're not tips and tricks you really want to be using at that very last stage to encourage someone to stay. Really, retention tools are something that should be built into every organization as part of your talent strategy, as part of your engagement strategy, and your retention strategy as well, so you can kind of continue to retain people throughout your organization as well. So some people will call these, instead of exit interviews, it's retention interviews or happiness interviews, where you might sit down with employees and think about, what's meaningful for you as an individual. What's your value proposition? Why do you like working here? And from there, you're able to understand, why they like to work for your organization and ultimately intend to stay. So they can be very beneficial. But some of the atypical retention tools that I want to talk about today, one of them is leadership. The second one then, flexibility. We can't avoid it. It's very, very popular at the moment. And the third then is wellness. And I really think these aren't the only ones that we can explore. There's so many others, but these are kind of the top three. And when we look at some of the statistics that came up a few minutes ago, these ones can play a really pivotal role in driving your retention strategy. So first of all, looking at leadership as a retention tool. I'm sure we've all heard this phrase, people leave managers, not companies. It was referenced by Mark Buckingham in one of his books, which is really a really good book. But it is really important to understand and assess where are we from a leadership perspective. Exit interviews might tell you that people might be leaving because of a manager. Sometimes there's grievances before someone leaves, and sometimes people just don't say anything because they're not comfortable saying anything. So sometimes it can be really difficult to assess or manage these. But it is very commonly known that people do tend to leave poor managers, and it is one of the number one reasons that people will leave organizations. In the last session, Barry spoke a little bit about this as well in terms of the 8 key leadership themes that we look at the Future of Work Institute. It may be a case, and it may be very important for you to consider leadership and your future leadership strategy moving into the future, and how that has a knock-on effect on your retention strategy as well. So one of the important things is to, when building out your talent strategy, is to look at leadership development, where your potential gaps are and where you need to really upskill your leaders in that regard. And this is our 8 key leadership framework, where we look at, it covers kind of things like self-awareness, and making sure that your leaders are sustainable savvy, so that they're also playing a role in your retention and your sustainability of people, and that they're human savvy. We're looking at some of the softer skills now that are really popular at the moment, like having empathy and things like that. That they're agile savvy and they have an element of flexibility, that they embrace technology. They don't necessarily have to be the experts, that they're strategic in their approach, they're inclusive, and they can bring an element of creativity and innovation to your organization. And these are the key elements that we've seen are important for future leaders. So when you're considering maybe your upskilling of your leaders, it may be important to consider them within this framework. Also, what we call multipliers and diminishers. So there are some leaders who will be very much in the multiplier phase, where they believe, and their mindset is people are smart and will figure this out. But then also you have some leaders who kind of fall into this diminisher category, where they feel, or their mindset is, they will never really figure this out without me. And when it comes to managing talent and approaching mistakes and things like that, multipliers and diminishers will think about these very, very differently. So leaders who are multipliers will very much think about managing talent as, we want to develop people. Diminishers will consider this, we using people. They approach mistakes. Multipliers will approach mistakes, as an exploration. Diminishers tend to blame. When they set direction, multipliers tend to challenge. Diminishers tend to tell. When they make decisions, multipliers tend to consult and a variety of different people, not just from above, but take consultation from their peers and from their subordinates as well. Diminishers tend to make the decision and not really take any input. Multipliers tend to, use support to get things done, and diminishers tend to have an awful lot of control. Now, if you want to learn more about this, Liz Wiseman has a brilliant book called Multipliers, which is all about this, and it's really, really beneficial for anyone who wants to learn a little bit about where they are. And it can be, we're not always multipliers. Sometimes we can fall into sometimes being diminishers and going back into multipliers. But what's important to know is, if we have a whole organization full of diminishers, that can be very, very toxic and very, very challenging. So it is very important to make sure that, as part of our leadership development, as part of our retention strategies, we're thinking about how our leaders lead. Are they multipliers? Are they diminishers? And do they have the skills to lead a future workforce? So to give you an example of an organization who really is using leadership as a retention tool, I want to give you an example. So On Post, most of you will probably know On Post is our postal service. They engaged with us a couple of years ago to support the development of their high potential female leaders in their organization. Now, this didn't just form part of their DEI strategy. This formed part of their retention strategy as well, to building a more sustainable future for the business and people, along with their approach to ensuring that they build the right skills and promote equal opportunities. Essentially, they found that high potential female leaders were leaving the organization at a certain point in time or weren't applying for promotions at a certain level. And they wanted to create this kind of supportive framework to encourage them to move their careers forward. So this included the development of a bespoke mentor program where senior leaders were trained to mentor high potential female leaders, the development and facilitation of a series of mentoring circles which focused on learning key elements relevant to them and leadership development, and also creating this peer-to-peer support group for this cohort. Psychometric assessments were also included, so mentees could identify and understand areas of focus and ongoing continuous improvement. And this program has been going on for the last kind of 3 years or so, and it's seen almost 90 colleagues complete the program. And it's been so successful that it's also been extended to other cohorts and other genders now as well. But it's also seen employees progress their careers, stay in the organisation, and also contributed to their zero pay gap report, which they launched a couple of years ago. So this is just an example I wanted to share, because I think this is really a good example of where an organization has thought about retention just a little bit differently and utilized and prepared for the sustainability of people through a program, a leadership development program. The second element I want to talk about is flexibility as a retention tool. And this can be quite a challenge because it's very, very popular at the moment, quite controversial, a lot of different pros and cons to it. Some organizations have fully embraced it, think it's great. Hybrid is working really well for them. Remote is working really well for them. And other organizations have tried it and said, no, this isn't working great for us. We need to bring everyone back in. So it really is different for every organization, and it's really hard to say what's good or what's bad. It's really about what's finding what works best for you and for your organization. And I would say it's not necessarily all about who shouts the loudest, you know. So yes, you need to take into consideration what employees want, but it also needs to be beneficial for your organization, for your strategy, for your goals, for your clients. So all of those things obviously need to be taken into consideration. However, it does show, there is a lot of evidence to show that companies that offer flexible working arrangements have lower rates of turnover, and flexible working can improve work-life balance and increase job satisfaction and enhanced overall well-being. Flexibility is here to stay. Remote working has been ranked the #1 workplace benefit, followed by health insurance and flexible working hours. Most candidates would not consider a new role without a hybrid option. And we've even seen that in CPL. Obviously, we have a recruitment element to our organization as well. And we've seen a lot of candidates turning it down, roles that don't offer these hybrid working needs. There is a positive outlook on the continued impact. So, you know, from our research, it has been shown that flexible and remote working impact in the next 12 months is overly positive, with 25% expecting productivity to increase and efficiency boosts, and 39% with better work-life balance and job satisfaction. So it is here to stay, and I would say it's about finding out what type of flexibility works for you. So I'm going to talk about a few different elements. So some of the most utilized flexible working options that we've seen from our research, the #1 is hybrid. So a hybrid option where you may be in the office, you may be working from home, but you can choose your own days, tends to be the #1. Second to that then is flexi time. So it's where you can choose your own hours. So you might be working Monday to Friday, 40-hour week, but you can choose how you choose those hours. The third then is hybrid with dedicated days. So your organization might have, you know, you can work from home a couple of days, you can work in the office a couple of days, but you might have a couple of anchor days like a Tuesday, Wednesday, or a Monday and Friday as your key anchor days when you're in the office. One key thing for organizations to consider is, what do you do with those days? You know, if you're coming in just to be on Teams calls, it's not necessarily making sense, but also it's important to kind of consider what they're being utilized for. Fully remote then is ranked #4, and early Friday finish is ranked #5. So some of what I think are the most underutilized flexible working options throughout our research found job shares, alternate shift patterns, part-time working, summer hours, and things like extra leave, like birthday leave. So some organizations might consider extra leave or birthday leave a benefit, but it also kind of adds into the flexibility conversation as well. And I would say it's really, really important, particularly for organizations working in manufacturing industry who may not be able to offer hybrid and remote. Some of these particular options may be beneficial to consider as part of your flexible working offer to employees. I do believe that we need to think about flexibility more broadly and beyond the typical hybrid remote ways of working, because when we talk about flexibility, it's not necessarily just limited to where we are working. So we like to consider flexibility in these three core areas. Firstly, being time, so how people spend their time at work. And this is looking at it beyond the traditional 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. It may be looking at different shift patterns and things like that. So there's probably, and space then is the next one, which is where people spend their time at work, which is probably the most challenging for organizations like manufacturing organizations, where you have people who need to be on site in order for your organization to function. So whilst space might not be an area that you might be able to have too much flexibility on, you may be able to consider time and conditions, and conditions then, the third one is the environment, the culture, the mindsets that allow people to do good work. So this is making sure that your leaders are trained to manage people maybe in a hybrid world, that they have good trust, people have autonomy. We go back to thinking about our savvy leaderships, and we go back to thinking about, our multipliers, that they are multipliers, that they give people and allow people to do meaningful work, and that they have career opportunities. All of those things have an impact on people's well-being and their intention to stay. So where you might not necessarily be able to do too much in the space category, I'd strongly consider having a think about, what can we do in the time area, or what can we do in the conditions area in terms of the mindsets that we have, and really looking at defining what does flexibility mean in our organization. So if flexibility doesn't mean hybrid versus remote, maybe flexibility needs to be redefined in your organization so that you can really and define that with your employees will be really beneficial. One example I want to give you as an organization who maybe has looked at flexible working options for multi-site, locations. DHL, which I'm sure everyone knows, are a German logistics company that provide courier package delivering and express mail services. They have both office-based staff and logistics and warehousing staff that are required to be on site some or all of the time. And while they can offer standard hybrid options to their office-based staff, the same can't be applied to the 85% of logistics and warehousing staff who are required to be on site to do their jobs. However, as they're competing for talent like everyone else, they felt that they had to offer some flexibility in order to kind of retain their staff. So to support flexible work, they've enabled remote, temporary, freelance, part-time capabilities with select roles. And instead of looking at roles and whether the employee works from home or in the office or in the warehouse, they've tried to apply the same rules across sites or units. And this aims to avoid having a scenario where only people who work in the office are hybrid or work from home and everyone else needs to be on site. Instead, they've kind of assessed, well, what's the majority need here for this site or this unit, and kind of looked at it in that way. And they've also had to assess or reassess shift patterns and become a little bit more innovative and evolve really to compete for talent, as well, obviously, as considering the safety of employees at all sites, because that's really important given the work that they do. So now their units or their sites have a range of flexible shifts, such as a 4-day week, 12-hour shifts, standard 8-hour shifts. And then what they do is they conduct productivity analysis on a regular basis, and then they adjust this as it's needed. So this might not be something that will suit every organization in a similar model, but it is an example of an organization that's kind of tried to think outside the box when it comes to flexibility. And there are a number of different things that you can do as well. Also thinking back to the underutilized things like job shares and part-time work and all of those things that also are considered additional leave and early Friday finishes, summer working hours, that are all things that could potentially be options for an organization within the manufacturing world that maybe is limited to kind of the space, as I said. So the other area I want to focus on then is wellness as a retention tool. And again, we know from earlier on that work-life balance, flexibility, well-being is one of the key drivers and key for people leaving. And motivation to stay. So flexibility will also have an impact on people's work-life balance. Wellness is more an output of some of that as well, because you'll have higher rates of well-being as a result. But there is a lot of research. We've done a full white paper on this, which I'll show you at the end. But there is a lot of research on the impact of workplace wellness. So, and particularly we call this strategic wellness, because sometimes what we've seen is organizations can go, oh, great, Jess, we'll do a wellness program and we'll do fitness and mindfulness and nutrition class, and that's all great. But really, it's not really aligned to anything in particular. It's not strategic enough. And we know that when we look at wellness programs more strategically, it can have a bigger impact on your organization strategy, your talent strategy, your attraction, your retention, your engagement stats. So it's really, really important. So some of the impact that we've seen of wellness programs is a 28% increase in promoters of your organizations. That's people amplifying, saying this is a great place to work. I'm willing to go tell a friend or family member to come and work here. So that's had an impact on their attraction and recruitment strategies. We've seen an increase, a 10% increase in onboarding experience, which is really, really important for organizations who have wellness built into their culture. It's there from induction right through, and we've seen an increase in their onboarding experience. And that's really the 6-month period. It's not just the 1 day of induction that they do. Onboarding is really the first 6 months, because that's really when employees are still kind of assessing, is this a right fit for me or not? We've seen an 18% increase in performance, and there's a lot of research to back up how wellness and improved well-being in employees can increase their performance, and thus then it increases their engagement and their retention to stay. And then we've seen a 6% increase in intent to stay. So wellness can have a huge impact on not just your retention strategy, but your attraction and engagement, which is really, really important. So how can we use wellness as a strategic enabler? So if you want to use wellness to retain employees, how can you really do that? So we have a model or a process we call the ACE approach to strategic wellness. It really looks at, firstly, auditing the employee and organization's well-being needs, taking a multi-dimensional approach to help kind of pinpoint gaps and areas to focus on. Then secondly, co-creating your wellness program to ensure the most impactful, engaging solutions for your employees, engaging employees and key stakeholders, and then driving continuous improvement to make sure that you're delivering on your return on value. And I'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail as well. So this is what we call the 8 dimensions of wellness. It's another model that we use. We've done a lot of research in this particular space. It's an area I'm very passionate about. When I first started working in HR, I was very passionate about driving wellness programs. At the time, we focused an awful lot on physical and emotional or mental health. And we were doing fitness classes and, mindfulness classes and all of those lovely things. But I realized people are still stressed, people are still leaving, people are still not engaged, or it wasn't really working. So what we did was we expanded our research to really look at, well, what's the underlying cause? What are the root causes for this increase in stress and ill health, and within the context of the workplace? Because obviously there's also a personal element to this. We're all responsible for our own well-being, but within the context of the organization, what other areas might be impacting people's well-being? And throughout this research, we found that if people have a lack of connection or social wellness, it can impact their well-being. The environment you're working in is toxic, if there's bullying and harassment, if you have poor leadership, it can have an impact on your well-being. Financial well-being becoming a little bit more popular now as well, is obviously having money to keep the lights on, and being able to know how to manage your money is really important and has an impact on your well-being. So occupational wellness, having career opportunities afforded to you, is really, really important. And actually we've found that a number of employees who have employees who have lower job opportunities or career opportunities are more inclined to leave an organization as well. And then spiritual wellness, less really about what you believe in and more around, your alignment with the organization's strategy, mission, values, purpose. That can have a knock-on effect on people's well-being. If it doesn't sit with you in terms of your values, you're more likely to leave. And then intellectual wellness, so how we communicate with each other, our culture within our organization, is another area that can impact people's well-being as well. So when we think about workplace wellness, we're really thinking about the root cause of wellness, and we're taking a root cause approach. So rather than an organization maybe going in and, taking the interventions first, let's do yoga, let's do nutrition, let's do resilience training. What we're doing is we're looking at, okay, within these 8 dimensions of wellness, what's really the biggest impact here? What's contributing to people's stress or their unwellness as such? And then how can we pick interventions off these little tree branches to drive our wellness program, to make it a little bit more strategic, to really uplift that wellness score, to drive wellness and engagement and ultimately productivity within the organization as well. So that's being a little bit more strategic in terms of how we approach wellness and assess and design our wellness strategies, as opposed to cookie cutter approaches, really. This is an example of an organization that we worked with previously, and this is just one element of their assessment, but I just wanted to give an idea of how this is used in the output, because I call these again atypical wellness solutions. One of the outputs from under the intellectual wellness, we found that there was conflict on the team. And one of the biggest reasons for conflict on the team was because this was a multicultural organization, multicultural teams. People probably just weren't communicating the right ways, didn't really understand what people meant. So it was a big issue for the organization. It was having the biggest impact on their well-being. So some of the interventions that we used for this particular, we did a lot of other things as well, don't get me wrong, but this one I think had the biggest impact. So some of the interventions were inclusiveness training, conflict resolution training, communication sessions so that people understand, how to communicate better, cultural days so people could understand a little bit more, they get to know each other and their overall culture, share their culture, and then team bonding events and things like that. So stuff that was like a little less serious than the training sessions and a little bit more interactive. And this was really one of the biggest interventions that had an impact on the overall well-being of the organization and moving that organization forward, as opposed to, then we did other things. We did fitness, we did mental health, we did all of those other things. But by far, this was the biggest thing that had an impact on people's well-being. And this is all on the basis of looking at the underlying root cause in order to create and build those interventions, which is really important. About co-creating generally, and I've worked in HR for many, many years, and I've made this mistake myself. You say, great, let's go make our wellness program and we'll build it and sure everyone will come. And it doesn't necessarily always work that way. And you're wondering why no one's coming to your lovely events and your wellness program that you've built. And one of the main reasons is that we haven't really gotten employees involved in the development of this. So our co-creation approach, very similar to what they call the IKEA effect. When people are involved in building something, they're more likely to use it. So, we like to always have co-creation sessions with employees where we can get their input, their thoughts, their ideas. And co-creation has really been found to encourage collaboration, to drive employee engagement rates and participation rates, particularly in the events. Opens communication throughout the organization. And I guess the organization are also showing, we care about your thoughts on this. Your voice is important. This is designed for you. And it's also an opportunity to gather deeper insights then for you to really get to the hub of some of the issues as well. So co-creation sessions, having focus groups, whatever you want to call them, can be really, really beneficial for designing your wellness interventions. Once you can use then the output of the survey to feed into those as well. So then ways to engage employees, and it goes without saying, obviously that the two elements, if you involve people and, you've done your assessment, you will get more engagement, but other ways you can ultimately drive engagement is through creation of wellness ambassadors. And also making sure that your leaders are really wellness-centric leaders, which is really important because we've worked with a number of organizations before where people have said, well, I can't go to this particular event because my manager won't let me, or I have to, there's an expectation that they need to be told they can, or you're allowed go. So I think it's really, really important that, as leaders, you're encouraging people, and people are encouraging their teams to go and engage in the wellness activities. Creating wellness vision statements can be very beneficial. Focus groups, as I mentioned earlier, can also be beneficial for driving engagement. Creating a wellness brand and pillars and a story behind your wellness program can be really beneficial. And I'm going to give you an example of an organization that did that and the impact that had on them, because that was by far the biggest impact on their overall engagement. And then creating wellness communications. So you might have a newsletter, you might have a mailbox, depending on how big you are, or it might just be posters on the wall, depending on whether people don't have email addresses, and then trying to make sure that there's things that are available for people. Maybe they're not always on site, or they're working shift patterns and they don't have access to their phones. So there are apps that can be available to employees where they can look at wellness activities in their own time. They can engage in these. It doesn't just have to be a work-related thing. They can look back on pre-recorded aspects, and they can still engage in things like step challenges and fun runs and all of those kind of things that organizations tend to do, because there sometimes can be a case that, well, the wellness program is just for people who work in the office. So again, a lot of these hybrid virtual wellness programs can be very beneficial for organizations who have multiple people working in different ways, and there's lots of technology out there that can facilitate those. My clicker isn't working now. Oh yeah. So the final step then is really about driving and ways to measure and drive your wellness program. So I suppose it's really important to understand, what do we want to get from our wellness program? How is this aligning with our organizational strategy? Maybe our strategy is including our talent strategy, and from a retention perspective, maybe we want to make sure, maybe our retention last year was really, really high. We want to make sure our retention is really, really low, and we want to use wellness as a strategic enabler to drive that. So it's really understanding what those kind of key performance indicators are. Again, there's lots of technology that can look at the impact of your wellness program, your wellness interventions, that can assess your attrition rates within 6 months after those events, and kind of tie it back to whether it had an impact on your wellness program, or your wellness program had an impact on that, I should say. So understanding employee wellness challenges, that's the audit stage. Mitigating employee risk with tailored interventions based on that, sort of informed interventions maybe. Engaging employees, then measuring it against your KPIs that you would have agreed with at the start, and then building that continuous improvement plan so that you're working together with your employees, not just, copy and paste what you did last year into next year, and that it's built year on year with employees as well. So it can be very beneficial. You get to also then showcase your return on value, so if you've noticed that your wellness program has had a key impact on your retention strategy, there's obviously a monetary impact on that. You may be able to use that as a way to get more budget for your wellness program next year. It can be used in multiple different ways as well once you're measuring it. So it is really important to measure the impact of the program. So this is an example of an organization that really looked at driving engagement through their wellness program. So Fáilte Ireland, most of you hopefully will know, are the National Tourism Development Authority, in the Republic of Ireland. They were looking really to design an overall wellness strategy as a key engagement tool for their employees. This was started during COVID, and the existing program was quite it lacked structure. Participation was really, really low. During this time, they wanted to show that they cared. They wanted this to really come across. It was a challenging time, obviously, we all know. So they really wanted to emphasize that the wellness program was there, but people just weren't engaging in it. And so some of the interventions included development of an internal wellness strategy, included engagement and communication plan. So there was development of, sections on their intranet, a wellness newsletter, a wellness email box as well, and development of a bespoke wellness brand, which included a story, name, assets, pillars, and behaviors, along with crafting the story that aligned with their overall business purpose. And there was a wellness launch event to drive excitement and awareness of this reimagined program, and kind of obviously we assess it on an ongoing basis and there were continuous improvements. But the images you see here on the left-hand side are the images that we co-created with the organization to make sure that it was completely relevant to them. It was relevant to their values, it was relevant to them as an organization, their mission, their purpose. So that we kind of played on the whole tourism wellness is a journey that everyone takes, you know. So it had a direct relationship to their organization. And the overall campaign then saw a 65% increase in attendance and engagement across the business. And the program is now a fundamental part of their overall culture and employee experience as a key enabler, essentially, for attraction, engagement, and retaining talent. So it can just go to show sometimes you might have a wonderful program, but it's just how you're communicating it out to employees might not be resonating with them. So again, having a look at what your story is in terms of your wellness program and how that has an impact then on engagement and participating in it can be really, really beneficial. If anyone wants to learn a little bit more about the wellness stats that I mentioned earlier on, you can download this white paper. Has a lot of the insights and stats that I mentioned already in more detail here. And also, just finally, just to summarize, you know, I would consider how can you upskill your leaders to drive retention in your organization. So do you need to encourage them to become more savvy and self-aware? Do your senior leaders need to be trained to mentor high potentials within your organization to drive retention? Do they need to be skilled in becoming multipliers and avoiding that diminisher mindset in your organization? Secondly, then, what other flexible working arrangements can you utilize outside of the common hybrid versus remote? If your organization is one where your employees need to be on site, which is obviously typical in manufacturing, what other innovative and attractive shift patterns can you offer? And what atypical, underutilized flexible working can you use? You might even need to define or redefine what flexible working means to you. And then how can you use wellness as a strategic enabler for engaging and retaining talent? Do you have a cookie cutter program that ticks a box, or using it to strategically engage and retain talent and have a think about how you might have an impact, how you might use some of the approaches that I mentioned? And you'll get access to all of these slides as well. Just before I go to questions, and I will go to questions, just two things. We, as part of this series, there is the Leadership Evolved that Barry did on the 6th of February, and obviously the one I've done now. We will be on the 20th of March, we'll have employee experience. And then on the 30th of April, we have the destination workplace. So we'll be exploring, you know, employee engagement, how you can drive engagement through creating experiences in an organization. And then we'll be talking about destination workplace. So how can you create a traction strategy as part of your value proposition to really try and create a destination workplace that people really want to come work for. And finally, before I come to questions, you're all offered a complimentary membership to Future Work World, which, as Mary mentioned earlier on, is our network for senior leaders, where we talk around a range of different topics relating to the future of work. And we have a range of hybrid events coming up in the next number of months. So as members, you'll be able to get access to all of those and some of the other videos. So I'm going to stop sharing, if that's okay, and I might take some questions. I think we have a good 20 minutes left.
Yeah, so feel free, everyone, to pop in your questions into the chat function or the Q&A function, whichever's handier for you. I don't see any at the minute, Elysia, but listen, thank you so much. Okay. There's so much food for thought there. I've taken lots of notes here, and actually don't know where to start with questions. There's so many questions, but you know, you reinforce that message, you know, that it is a strategy. You need to take a strategic approach, because you know, maybe a lot of companies are thinking out there that the right way of keeping talent or attracting talent is just, you know, increased pay or increased flexibility. But I suppose the problem is that we've such a tight labour market that those are the sort of areas that your rivals or your competitors can easily replicate. So it's thinking outside the box and putting together that whole piece strategy, which will then, you know, enable you to have that edge over competitors. So all of this is really fantastic material. And if you're okay, Elysia, can we share these slides with
Yes, of course.
participants?
Yes. I'll send them on to you
Okay.
this afternoon. You can absolutely, yeah.
Okay, great, because there's so much in there. So one question that I have is, I know that a lot of attendees on today are maybe in a HR capacity, and maybe HR managers, and I'm sure they're all saying, look, we are so busy. We are so busy recruiting staff, or maybe doing performance appraisals, or maybe we've been pulled into health and safety stuff as well, or dealing with grievances. In your experience, and I know there's maybe lots of technologies out there that can enable some of these processes and make this simpler, like a technology platform. But in your experience, who is taking on all of this? Are companies creating new roles to help drive this, or recognizing it as well that it needs to be it needs to come from top down as well through leadership. So maybe just
a bit of all of the above, really. So it really depends on the organization's budget and their need, and really their investment in this. If they see it as a strategic tool or a strategic enabler, sometimes they can justify the budget and the spend. So we've seen areas where people have dedicated resources looking at specifically after these particular areas. Not a plug, but they've all outsourced it to us. If they don't have the time or capacity to do it, but maybe they have a little bit of budget and they need some support, we can at least give them direction. They can fully outsource it to us, or we build the strategy and you go implement it. Sometimes it's like they don't have the headspace to even just have the thinking or go do research. Sometimes it's like we just need to get someone to give us some ideas and build the strategy, and then we'll go do it. So there's others have taken that option. Or some have just taken it on as additional work that they have to do, if they don't have the budget or the to take on extra staff. But they all tend to fall under HR roles and responsibilities. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. We have a question in. What's your thoughts? So we're dealing with manufacturing here, and you outlined some of those strategies, let's say, in terms of the flexibility and shift patterns and that. So what's the thoughts really on that 4-day week? We're coming across more and more manufacturers that are introducing that. Are there any sort of surveys or any analysis of how that's working in terms of maybe increasing productivity or
the research
retention?
It's kind of hard because it's relatively new. The research is really hard to say it's working or not. However, it has been seen that those who are introducing it, are seeing increased productivity rates. So there does seem to be some benefit, but I would say we probably need another 6 to 12 months rolling it out to really see if it's having an impact. Like the example I gave you in terms of DHL have it in some of their sites and some of their locations. They do ongoing productivity assessments to see if it's having an impact, and they change their shifts based on that. And I would really encourage any organization thinking of any kind of flexible working initiative, whether it's a change in shift or a change in hybrid or remote, always pilot it for 6 to 12 months and do those assessments. Never commit to this is our end game, we're going to have this forever. So you might have a cohort where you might pilot it with, or it may suit certain sites, or it may start suiting cohorts within your organization. But at the moment, the research is favorable.
Yeah, so it's not a one size fits all approach, but measure, and what gets measured gets done.
Yeah.
So it's important, as you said, to measure it and have that initial strategy that you're to monitor that. So we're at the minute, there's a lot of talk. Obviously the labour market's so tight, and we recognize that a lot of people have caring responsibilities, and there was a report come out actually yesterday from Carers NI that 1 in 3 particularly women are leaving for caring responsibilities. I think it was lower now in terms of the stats that you have that. Elysia, what can employees do more to help retain carers in the workforce, and and all that flexibility?
Yeah,
is there any good example?
It's a really good question, and I think it's a really important one that we need to look at. And look, not to generalize, but it does tend to be women who end up leaving for those caring duties. And And it's not just caring for children, it can be caring for parents as well. Now, it does obviously impact men, but what we're seeing is the higher rates, it does still tend to be women, which isn't ideal. So one of the things that we've seen work really, really well from a retention perspective is on a case-by-case basis being open to agreeing a flexible working model for that individual. So that might be job share, part-time, different working hours. Some organizations can be hesitant to do these because they don't want to set a precedent. But I think that's very old school thinking. And that I think we do need to, if we want to retain women in the organization, we want to retain really good talent, we need to be thinking around what can we do for these individuals. So whilst you might have an organization rule on flexibility or your hybrid remote working strategy, you might have very set shift patterns. I think there needs to be caveats for people to apply for certain flexible working roles within an organization based on certain types of scenarios where it may be warranted. And I think there needs to be an element of flexibility, or we'll just always struggle with it because somebody has to do the caring, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, it is. It's key for organizations. You say it's mainly affecting women, but we within the manufacturing, there's so many males as well have those caring responsibilities. So,
of course,
we're encouraging companies, and we're seeing it every day now, where there is that increased flexibility, where as much as possible. Obviously, we recognise that a lot of it's on the floor production staff that obviously can't work to have the hybrid model, etc., etc. But that flexibility in terms of those shift patterns as well. Yeah, it was like at a slight giggle when you mentioned on post, and obviously with the whole post office scandal going on now, but that retention of female workers and those sort of programs where that peer-to-peer mentoring would be very effective as well, and creating that kind of that gender diversity piece is key.
And it can be also quite quite beneficial. It's not very it's very cost effective is what I'm trying to say. So like you might bring in external people to train the mentors and maybe facilitate some things, but ultimately once you've got your program in place, you can pretty much just continue to recycle it, so it can be a very cost effective way as opposed to doing a full blown leadership development program or bringing in external coaches and things like that can be more costly. So it can be quite cost-effective way.
And that women returners to work as well. I know there's a few good programs which are offering placements. I was chatting to a company yesterday. So if there's any companies there, look at the women's returner program. The women are going out on 8-week work placements where they can work from 9 o'clock to 1 o'clock, I think maybe 4 days a week with an employer. And that's offered through some of the local colleges. So we'll try and maybe get some information sent out on our e-zine on that as well. I think you covered the brief really well, Elysia, in terms of changing expectations. It's very much about improving and changing work for the better. And that value proposition and how you craft that. So thank you so much.
Yes, Elysia. No problem. Thank you for having me.
Really, really good. The next two webinars, I'll just give another quick plug for them as well. Our next webinar we'll be having on the 20th of March, and it's employee experience. So it's about how insights-driven employee experiences can drive performance. And then our final one is Destination Workplace, which will be on Tuesday, the 30th of April. So if you haven't already signed up, you can sign up on the same link. We'll send out some reminders as well. But thank you so much. Elysia, are you happy if people want to follow up with you directly on your services?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I'll send you on my my details, or you'll follow me on LinkedIn if you wish to, but happy to have conversations. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining. Thanks